Welcome everyone. Welcome to this episode in the Web3 Metaverse series out of the Digital Transformation Lab in University College Cork. And absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. Mark van Rijmenam. And I know each time I've heard Mark being interviewed, I can see that smile on his face when people make a mess of his name. So actually, maybe that's part of the challenge today. How do you pronounce this Dutch surname? But look, we were just saying beforehand, I've been following, and Tony's been following Mark for a while. I know, I didn't realize it's about 4 books at this stage, Mark. I think I definitely remember, was it Think Bigger, which was really about big data. I remember you were writing about the blockchain maybe about 4 years later, maybe, and AI analytics. And now we have a new book, and myself and Tony have had the opportunity of reading it. It's Stepping into the Metaverse. There's a subtitle there, how the immersive internet will enrich or I think unlock $1 trillion social economy. I'm trying to read it, it's behind me here. So absolutely fantastic book, Mark. So what I'll do, Mark, is I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can actually introduce yourself to our audience, and then we'll hand over to Tony, and Tony will kick off with a few questions. So welcome, Mark.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Patty and Tony. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And I must say you pronounced my name quite well. It is van Rijmenam, which is a very difficult Dutch name, let alone in English, which is one of the reasons why I created the brand The Digital Speaker. So I'm also known as The Digital Speaker. And I have been in this business for over a decade. I'm a future tech strategist or a strategic futurist, you can call me. Which means that I think about emerging technologies and how they change organizations as well as society. So I look at technologies, cutting edge technologies, and how they impact our lives, how they impact our business, how we can use them in ways that is beneficial to society, how we can have a responsible use of these technologies. I've been delivering keynotes for over a decade all around the globe, Fortune 500 companies, very large events, global events. Which I very much enjoy doing. I run a platform called Dataflock, which is a media platform around emerging technologies. And recently, I have started a research institute called the Digital Futures Institute, which is all about ensuring a thriving digital future for business and society, really helping, again, organizations and society to use these technologies, to understand these technologies and benefit from them in the most optimal way, in an approach that's very much stakeholder driven and not so much shareholder driven, so long-term approach, how we can use these digital technologies. And I very much like to practice what I preach. I'm available as an avatar, I'm available as a hologram. I'm currently building a digital twin of myself, which hopefully at some point in the future should look like me, talk like me, sound like me, move like me. So who knows, you are talking to a digital twin at the moment. But that's in the future. But it's the good thing about doing these kind of things as well with technology is that I have a very deep understanding of how these technologies actually apply and how they actually work and how you can actually use them. And I share that knowledge here. I'm happy to share the knowledge with everyone here on the webinar, and as well with, as I said, with organizations and events around the globe.
Super. Well, Mark, I have read the book. It's a fantastic book. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
I have been following you. In fact, anyone who's not following Mark should follow Mark, because he mentioned the digital speaker. You can actually see his holograph actually delivering presentations. So it is fascinating, and it is a case of you do practice what you speak about. Before we get into this book, Mark, I suppose what would really be interesting for me is the genesis. What gave you the idea? Because I know this wasn't you sitting down in a dark room and said, I'm going to write about the metaverse. I mean, you went and spoke to 100+ creators. You got 130+ people to fill out in very detailed form. But what drove you to write this book, and why was it important?
Well, it's quite funny. I was approached by Wiley, and that's what approached me to write this book. And they approached me and if I wanted to write this book, and I thought, well, the metaverse is a convergence of everything that I've been talking about for the past decade. So I wasn't planning to write a new book, but then if opportunity knocks, you better open the door, I always think. And so I thought, well, why not? Let's write a book about this. But it's actually quite funny because the plan was, when I was in discussion with Wiley, is to have the manuscript ready at the end of January. We finally closed the contract early November. So that's when I started writing. And the agreement was that I would on a rolling basis, I would submit the chapters to the publisher. But my idea was I first want to have a very deep understanding of what the community actually thinks about the metaverse, what the metaverse is, how to create an open metaverse, because that's what the idea of the book is, to create a blueprint for an open metaverse. What do they think? So I want to talk to as many people as possible. And indeed, as you said, I spoke to almost 100 people, very, very in-depth interviews, sometimes an hour and a half long. I did about 150 surveys indeed. So coming like mid-December, my publisher was getting worried, you know, Mark, when is your first chapter going to come in? I said, oh, don't worry, it'll come in. And on Boxing Day, December 26th, I started writing. And on January 28th, I finished my manuscript. So I literally wrote it in 5 weeks, with all the preparation done, of course. And for me, the book was very much also an exercise, again, in practice what you preach. Because I used a lot of AI to help me with this, imagine that's a year ago. So all the generative AI tools that we have today didn't really exist back then. But I used technology to summarize articles, to schedule the meetings, to transcribe the articles, and that allowed me to write this book in such a short time frame. I very much enjoyed it writing it.
Okay, and Mark, I know you get into detail in terms of describing the metaverse and whatnot, but that wasn't easy because when you went out there was a lot of confusion as to what the metaverse was. But I suppose what I'd be really interested to find out, what was the biggest surprise for you when you did all your research and interviews and everything else? What was the biggest thing that stood out for you?
Wow, that's a very good question. Well, I think the biggest thing is that everyone had such a different perspective of what the metaverse actually is, roughly 250 interviews and surveys and 250 different answers, and some people are really convinced that the metaverse is virtual reality or is Web3, or others that the metaverse is really just gaming, and other people say no, the metaverse is augmented reality. And so this breadth of definitions of what the metaverse actually is, I thought was really interesting. I sort of tried to make my own definition out of that, of what I think that the metaverse is. But that I think was the most striking.
Okay, well, you might as well give us your definition because everyone's dying to hear.
Yeah. So my definition of the metaverse is very simple. It's where the digital and the physical worlds are converging, but where the digital moves into the physical and where the physical moves into the digital. And that's much more than I always say that the metaverse is not Web3, the metaverse is not virtual reality, the metaverse is not gaming, but it can be all of these above. Where we move the physical into the digital. That's basically what we're doing at the moment. What we're doing at the moment is basically, like, you could argue metaverse version 0.1, because you are both physically in Ireland, I'm physically in Sydney, Australia, and we're meeting in a digital room. So you could argue that this is part of the metaverse in my definition. But there are more things. I see digital twins as sort of tier 1 of the metaverse. Yeah, tier 0 being the physical reality, because it allows us to have a physical asset and be able to interact with it in a virtual world. And we can access this virtual world either through a virtual reality, but also through your desktop or your tablet or your smartphone or your smartwatch or whatever wearable device you're talking about. Now, the other area is where the digital moved into the physical. This is, of course, very much related to augmented reality, where we can add like near infinite layers on top of the physical reality that can give us, can be used for entertainment. We can have a flying, purple centaur above the Opera House in Sydney that you can only view with your augmented reality, either glasses or through your phone. What's been used at, for example, last year at Coachella, where you had like all kinds of augmented reality things happening at the festival. But it can also be used for city officials that want to see how the traffic flows, for example, when they are, driving around the city, or in factories where you need to fix an asset and you have a digital overlay that tells you what to do without having to call in the mechanic. So these are all kinds of ways that the digital moves into the physical world. And I think that will have a much bigger impact on society than the other way around, because we can literally add infinite layers. And to close off, I think at some point we'll get rid of our phones, we'll get rid of our tablets, we'll get rid of our computers, and we'll just have smart glasses or smart contact lenses, and we'll be able to have 5 screens in front of us and have and work like that in mid-air on your computer and do whatever you need to do. So yeah, that's sort of my definition. Long answer, but yes, simplest version, the convergence of physical and digital worlds. It is in essence just the next iteration of the internet. That's even a shorter definition, an immersive internet where we move from 2D to 3D, made possible by the convergence of the physical and the digital.
Yeah, very interesting. And like, I suppose when people use the word metaverse very often, we're really thinking the potential of this future internet, Mark. But what elements do you feel we're missing for the metaverse to really realize its future potential? What are the pieces of the jigsaw that we don't have yet, or that we're struggling to put in place?
Well, there are many puzzles that we don't have. As the late Clay Christensen said, the next big thing often starts off looking like a toy, and that's exactly what we see happening with the metaverse. You look at Decentraland, look at the Sandbox, look at Roblox, look at Minecraft. They're low polygon, so to say, because of a constraint that we have. And we've embraced that constraint and we like it and it's good. But I think that it eventually will move to a high polygon world where we have hyper realistic worlds that offer a unique experience. But the technology to stream hyper realistic volumetric data across the globe simply doesn't exist yet, let alone in a decentralized form. And if it exists, it's probably very expensive. And you need the latest technology, you need the best computers. I can barely run Unreal Engine 5 on my MacBook Pro 2022, which I bought a couple of months ago, with the best specs. It really needs to work very, very hard if I want to get my digital twin to work. So that sort of shows you that this is not the technology, the hardware is still in development. Now, once we have the hardware, then there's still, of course, the software needs to keep up, to catch up. And that's also still a long time. So I think that before we move to a metaverse, which is really this convergence of the physical and the digital, probably at least 3, 5, 7 years away, and then it starts really to get interesting.
And sometimes I'm intrigued, Mark, because I know the push is on for higher fidelity renditions of ourselves or of humans. But when you look at some areas of our life, and particularly at young kids, they don't necessarily, when they watch, for example, kids TV, very often they're looking for different characteristics, different shapes of beings, bigger faces, bigger eyes, in some cases even animals, they relate more to animals. So is it always about higher resolution, higher fidelity versions of ourselves? Maybe it's an alternative reality is what some people are looking for.
That could very be the case, and I think especially for kids, that's certainly a possibility. But if we look at, for example, Meta, Horizon World, or Microsoft's virtual reality, we have our avatars without legs. We have avatars that are really low polygon. They don't really resemble who you are. Everyone joked about Mark Zuckerberg releasing his selfie from the virtual world a couple of months ago. For those kind of things, from business perspective, I think we really need hyper realistic, fidelity, high polygon to make it happen. So we can have this conversation, which feels as if we have, an in-person meeting with us all being geographically apart. For kids, different story. Gaming, different story. But I think for business, for the enterprise metaverse, that's something that I think will definitely be very much hyper realistic, high polygon, etc.
But just on that, Mark, I mean, like one of your interesting headings in the book is you can be who you want to be in the metaverse. Right? So I could be a dragon, I could be anything I want. But you also say though that virtual worlds mimic society. So if we don't get our arms around this, we might live out these fantasies in a metaverse world, but actually create something that we don't want.
100%. And creating a virtual world is really difficult. because you need to have the governance, you need to have the rules and the regulations and the how people interact with that. And we see this happening, we see this going wrong all the time. You know, a couple of months ago, or almost a year ago, when Microsoft, I think Facebook released their Horizon World, within days, women started to get harassed. You know, and you know, if we don't have the right rules and regulations, the governance mechanisms in place, then these virtual worlds will become the Wild West. You know, because people don't know, fortunately, really how to behave and in the virtual worlds. You know, we see that, you know, on Twitter people shout, but if you then confront them with what they're saying, they go, "Oh, I'm sorry, so sorry, I didn't mean that." You know, simple example, I did it, I think for book number 2 or 3, I can't remember, where someone wrote a really nasty comment, and I reached out to that person like, "Hey, well, why did you do that?" And, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Yeah, you could find that it's me," you know, and within minutes it was gone. Which you know, you know, we, as I always say, we might be you know, digital native, but we're not necessarily digitally literate. We don't necessarily understand how to behave in this digital world. So now, if we move now to from a 2D to a 3D virtual world, if you move from a 2D public square, being Twitter, to a 3D public square, where you know, we're not digitally literate, we don't know how to behave, we don't know how to understand the rules and the governance of that particular virtual world, then I think we are in for some trouble. So it's, if you are a virtual world builder, if you want to build a virtual community, a virtual society, you need to think really carefully about, you know, how do we want people to interact with each other, you know, and left, right, middle, center, everything is fine as long as you have, you know, governance in place, as long as you define what is allowed and what's not allowed.
Mark, one of the things that you did talk about in the book is you sort of said, well, yeah, but the parents can't necessarily give the kids that guidance because the parents actually don't understand what the kids are doing in these games to start with. And you say the schools have a role, but arguably the schools don't have a clue what the kids are doing either. So, yeah. So how do we solve this problem?
Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to solve with my Digital Futures Institute, because, you know, education is a really big problem, both for enterprise. You know, because large Fortune 500 companies generally don't really have a deep understanding of a good understanding of what these technologies are and how to best apply them, that they have, you know, the best impact and the most benefit for all stakeholders, so employees, customers, shareholders, society, etc. But at the other end, you know, the general public, the parents, the teachers, they have no clue how these technologies work. And to be honest, I can't blame anyone, because the technology is moving so fast. Like, it's insane how fast technology is moving. You know, these days you hear all about generative AI and how good the technology has become. You know, in this case, AI, where you can ask questions, you can have conversations, you can get, you know, all kinds of text being created, all kinds of videos, images, 3D worlds, with a string of text. Bam, you have a virtual world. And you know, I can't blame anyone that you can't keep up. You know, it's difficult for me to keep up, and it's my job to be up to date. And we're really, you know, living the exponential age at the moment, and it's going so fast. And you know, especially because of the fact that it's going so fast, we need to think really carefully about how we build our technologies. What do we want this technology to do? And that's unfortunately not always the case. You know, as part of my book, I interviewed quite a few also startups, and I asked them, you know, have you thought about the consequences of whatever you're building? They said, no, we're just building cool technology. And I'm like, dude, you can't do that. You need to think about these kind of things, because if you have 1 million users, you have an impact. And if you see governance as an afterthought, which unfortunately we saw with Web 2, then we have a problem, as we have with Web 2. So yeah, we really need to think carefully, and this applies for everyone within the value chain. Yeah, it applies for the startups, it applies for the enterprise, it applies for the governments, and it applies for the general public, who needs to understand how to deal with these technologies. And yeah, and as I said, I'm with my Digital Futures Institute. I have set myself the objective to solve that problem.
And really, really important work, Mark. Mark, I'm intrigued, and maybe we sort of alluded to it slightly already. You know, we're hearing about the metaverse, we're hearing about the omniverse. but you're definitely calling for the idea of an open metaverse, and especially in terms of that, doing social good, that we need to be aware of social impact. Can you tell us a bit about what are the differences between these things? The metaverse that a lot of people are talking about, we now hear this thing called the omniverse, and you're talking about the open metaverse.
Yeah. So the omniverse is just the metaverse, I think. It's a term which is being pushed by NVIDIA, I would argue that omniverse, what they call the omniverse, is just the enterprise metaverse. I think it just throws in more confusion. But okay, that's their trademark, their brand that they use. So that's fine. In my world, my definition, there is only one metaverse. So we don't have multiple metaverses. There's only one metaverse. There's only one internet. And we have, internet, and we have intranet, and so we have a public metaverse, and we'll have an enterprise metaverse. That's sort of the definition. Now, the definition between a walled garden metaverse or a closed metaverse versus an open metaverse is much bigger, because I think a walled garden metaverse is basically what we have today. We have no interoperability, we have no control over our data, we have no control over our digital assets, and we have no control over our identity. If you want to move away from Facebook, you can't take your data, you can't take your assets and move it to another platform. We have no control over identity. When Zuckerberg announced Meta, it's an example that I write in the book, in last year, October 28th, I think 2 or 3 days later, or even faster, an Australian artist who has the handle Metaverse on Instagram saw her entire account of 10 years being deleted with the push the button. She couldn't ask any question what happened. She couldn't get her account verified. She tried, for weeks to get it resolved. Only when she reached out, I think to the New York Times or another global newspaper, and they reached out to Facebook. Said, "Oh, we're so sorry. This happened by accident." Oh, we of course all know that it didn't happen by accident. And I think that's the world we live in today. Now, obviously, Mr. Zuckerberg, and I think it's not a secret that I'm not really a fan of what he's doing. Wants to continue what he's doing. So yes, he says all the right things, and he says privacy, and he says interoperability, but I don't trust him, and neither should anyone, I think, trust them, because those $10-15 billion that he put into the metaverse, they need to be recouped, and so your data will be used for advertising. Point. Period. I think that's important to be aware of. And I don't want to have a metaverse where I don't control my own data, especially because in the metaverse, we'll have data coming in at 10, 100, 1,000 times the speed as we do have today. Because of course, 3D internet collects a lot more data, creates and collects, uses a lot more data. So that's, I think, the difference. An open metaverse, you and I control our own data. We control our own digital assets. We control our own identity. We determine who gets access to our data. We determine who gets access to our identity. We determine who gets access to which part of our identity. And whatever digital asset in the form of NFTs, we create, we win, we earn, we take in games, we whatever you can think of, belong to you. And you can take them from one virtual world to another virtual world to another augmented experience, and you control that. And I think this can be best compared to the Peruvian economist, and I forgot his name now, who said that when we move when we first had property rights in the physical world, your house, became as a place for settlement to something that you could use for as a way to monetize your business. Because you had a house, and before that the government could just take it away, and now you had proof it was yours, so you could go to the bank and you could get a mortgage against it. If we have the same thing from the digital equivalent, through the use of NFTs, then we can prove that we own a digital asset and we can monetize it. And I think that is extremely powerful. And that is possible within an open metaverse. Therefore, in an open metaverse, we also need crypto, because that's what makes the open metaverse go round. In a closed metaverse or walled garden metaverse, we don't need that, because it's just controlled and owned by the centralized entity that controls the database and that gives out tokens, or gives out Robux, or what is it in Fortnite? But you have no control over that. I don't think that's the right direction. I think we should, especially when the metaverse, it becomes as important, if not more important than our digital lives. Our digital lives become more important than our physical lives, which, mind you, for Generation Z and Generation Alpha is already the case. I think we should really have full control over ourselves, and it should not be in the hands of 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 big tech companies who become all powerful.
Yeah, and I know there's a question here, Mark, and I think it ties in very neatly with this. You know, I think you do say in the book, and correctly so, though, that you can have the metaverse without Web 3.0. But can you really have an open metaverse without Web 3.0, without that decentralized, maybe the blockchain, etc.?
No, definitely not. So the metaverse doesn't need Web 3. That's what I write. Then we end up in a more how do you say it, a controlled version of what we have today. But if you want an open metaverse, then we need Web 3 technologies. We need decentralized technologies to have that control of our own data. And whether you use different blockchain technologies, whether you use other distributed ledger technologies, that doesn't really matter. But you need to have some form of decentralization, so that you control your data, assets, and identity, and not someone else.
Mark, if you take it though that the big guys, they control Web 2 with the walled gardens, so they have arguably no interest in creating a Web 3 that's decentralized, because they want to keep those walled gardens. What's going to be the tipping point, or will Web 3 be an ideology that doesn't achieve its potential? Is something going to happen that sort of says, no, actually the world is going to shift, or is it that these Web 2 giants will continue buy Web 3 companies to get themselves in there, but they still want to build walled gardens around it?
I think the latter will definitely be the case. Web 2 companies will fund and pay for all these Web 3 companies in order to control them. You see this already happening. OpenSea, nothing decentralized about it. These are just examples. I think decentralized is a different story because it's DAO, so it's truly decentralized. I think what the chances that we end up in an open metaverse are unfortunately rather slim. There's several reasons for that. I think first, big tech continues to doesn't want to give up control, and we see that with Apple that says if you want to use NFTs on our platform, you have to go through our tax system. Well, not their tax system, but their payment system, and have to give them 30% of whatever you do. So that doesn't work in a decentralized world, because then there's nothing left after you sold your NFT 3 times. There's nothing left. So that doesn't work, I think. But that's what they do. Secondly, is the general public needs to be educated, because as general public we are lazy. We want the most easy and seamless experience, and we don't want to put an effort in whatever we want to do. And big tech knows this, so they are, fantastic at creating this seamless experience to hook you up. And if we as the general public don't change, if we don't vote with our data, an open metaverse will never happen. We need to vote with our data. We need to say, okay, we want to have control over our own data. And yes, that requires more work. Yes, that requires more responsibility on my end. But if we don't do that, we'll end up in a world which I think will be rather dystopian, where big tech will only become so much bigger and have so much power and control over our own lives, where toxic recommendation engines will, really determine our world and manipulate us, and where free will sort of disappeared as if it never happened. I don't want to end up in a world like that. So there are several things necessary. One is startups need to build. They should not fall for the big money for big tech, which is very difficult, because if you spend a lot of time and effort and big tech comes by here is $1 billion. Try to say no to that. So that's one thing we need to happen. We need to make the experience a lot more seamless. If you want to buy an NFT and drop it into a DeFi protocol to get a loan to buy more NFTs, that's a whole lot of work, where you really need to have a good understanding of what you're doing. You should avoid any fat finger mistakes before you know it, you've lost your NFT, which have happened so many times already. So we need to make the experience a lot better, and we need to create this. We need to educate people starting from children, from a young age, to help them understand how to behave in this digital world. Because if you don't speak the language of this digital world, how on earth are you going to move around? If you go to a foreign country and you don't speak the language of that country, you have a very hard time moving around, and there's a big chance that you'll be scammed because you don't understand and people try to take advantage of you. If you do speak the language, it's a totally different experience. And I think the same thing we should achieve in the digital world, because it's sort of, the past 20 years sort of happened to us. 20 years is of course nothing. That since the internet really is around, and we sort of fell into it, and without really thinking. And there's a lot of big chance that the same thing will happen again with the metaverse, because when we had Web 1. We had control over data. We had control over our own website. We hosted just your own data, but it was very hard work. So there were companies who said, with first the best intentions, look, we're going to solve this problem for you. We'll make it really easy for you. By the way, we don't charge you for this, and have fun using it. Oh, well, that's cool. Free technology. Something for free. Generally, people will like it. And sort of we sleepwalked sort of into this trap. And the same thing can happen now today, because building Web3, building for the metaverse, building augmented reality experiences, building virtual worlds is really, really hard. So we'll have now companies who say, well, we'll make it very, very easy for you. We might make it free of charge for you. And then we might end up in the same trap. So there's definitely no guarantee that we'll end up in an open metaverse. Mm-hmm. But I think we as a society, we should do whatever it takes to not end up to end up in an open metaverse, because otherwise we have a really, really big problem if we do not.
And I'm going to be maybe slightly controversial here, Mark. I think you're right. There can be a metaverse without Web 3.0, but sometimes I'm left wondering, has the metaverse actually taken a focus off the value of Web 3.0? Because you can have Web 3.0 without the metaverse, and in a way, I know you wrote about the blockchain, distributed ledgers, distributed applications back 4 years ago, at least at this stage, Mark. And I think there was an agenda then that was talking about the power of decentralization. I just wonder, have we taken the focus off that and we're now talking about avatars this and avatars that, and all important stuff, but have we actually, I suppose, put the discussion about the importance of decentralization into neutral as a result?
Good question. I don't think so, because the Web3 community is still really, really hard at work of building Web3. And Web3 is infrastructure. Let's not forget that. Web3 is infrastructure that we're building. It's not fancy websites. It's infrastructure, and it's the pipes, and it's the sewage that we're building. Which is really hard work to build, and that work is still going on. And there are several accelerators, Outlier Ventures, that, for example, that are doing amazing work to make this happen. Now, to one extent, Zuckerberg did a good thing because he put the metaverse on the map, but he also ruined it by taking control of it and showing us avatars without legs and in weird faces. So we just like blockchain had like a reputation problem 4 or 5 years ago because of all the ICO scams. The metaverse has a reputation problem because of that, as well as because of all the NFT scams and the funky monkeys that sold for way too much money that didn't really make sense. And so we have a reputation. It has a reputation problem, and the metaverse, I think the metaverse term will hopefully disappear in a couple of years' time, because the metaverse is just it's just the internet, and instead of going on the internet, if you want to look something up, if you want to watch a video, if you want to have a call, when the metaverse arrives, we are in the internet. We are part of the internet. The internet will be as pervasive as the air we breathe. It will just be there, and hopefully the term the metaverse will just disappear. Because in the end, it's just the same thing. It's just it helps us understand this, but in the end, it's the same thing. Just like blockchain technology or Web3, as I said, it's the infrastructure. Do you understand how a website works? Do you understand how a MySQL database? Well, you might for your profession, but 99.9% of people don't. I certainly don't know how an elastic database works. You know, I have no idea. But it runs the internet, and so it's the unsexy stuff, Web3, that is being built at the moment, and that it's fine that we don't have much attention to it as long as they continue building and not selling off to big tech. I think we have a lot of opportunities there, but it's these are just, you know, people try to make money, and people try to use these funds, brand themselves, to make money. 5 years ago, we had, everyone putting blockchain in the names, and if you had put blockchain in your name, your share price would rise by 400%. And now people put metaverse in the name, because if you put metaverse in your name, then your share price rises by 400%. And we have chief metaverse officers, which doesn't make sense. I find it a bit. I understand why it happens, and it helps us to hold on what's happening. But in the end, it's just the internet. It's just digital, and it's changing our world.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, Mark. I mean, if I think what you're saying is the metaverse is how you experience the internet. The Web3 is infrastructure, and I was reading a piece there recently that said, Web 1 was about infrastructure, Web 2 was about users, Web 3 at the moment is about infrastructure, and it needs to move on to back to users, so it becomes easy and intuitive and all those things. But I think in parallel, what you're saying is, let's not wait till we get there to figure out what that world should be like and how it should be regulated and whatnot. Because one of the things, and you make a fascinating point in the book, I think you said in a 20-minute VR game, there's 2 million data points. And I think for most of us, we have no concept of how much data is being collected on us every second of the day when we're using all these tools. And one of the things that you focus in on is about this self-sovereignty, in terms of this ability to control. Now, is that something that we should expect as a civil right, a human right, or is it something that actually, if we want it, you'll have to pay for it? Because at the moment, as you rightly said, we are the product, so we get it for free. But if we want that, this is mine, and I will determine who sees it, who gets it, what not, is that something that I should expect for free?
Well, your passport costs money, so I don't think we can expect it for free, and we shouldn't, because then you are, the product. But it should also not cost the world. It should be accessible to everyone, because it should be a civil right, that you control your own data and not Mr. Zuckerberg or Mr. Bezos or who else. And I think that's really important, especially because as I in the example. The metaverse will have so much more data collected. And again, a good example, and it's a meta example, because I just really don't like what they're doing. But when the Meta Quest Pro was released, everyone was like, "Oh wow, such a nice shiny toy," and everyone flocked like lemmings to this and bought this pretty much Trojan horse and brought it into the house, because it's a fancy toy. It does really cool stuff. But it also collects a ton of data. It has eye scanning technology, so it knows where you're looking at and for how long, and where your focus of attention is. It has cameras at the front, so it scans your room. It knows who's in your room. It knows what is in your room. It knows what you're doing in your room. It knows if you have a tremor in your hand, it might indicate a disease, and all that information is being used for advertising. Just a couple of days ago, I saw an article which stated that on several tax websites in the US, they have the Facebook pixel, and Facebook takes your tax data to improve their advertising. And we just find that normal, and I'm like, people wake up, now it's text data. 5 years from now, it's your heart rhythm that determines that you control that avatar. 15 years from now, it are your thoughts when we connect the internet to a brain-computer interface, and Mr. Zuckerberg knows what you think. Do we want that? No, of course not. So therefore, we have to think now. We have to make a regulation now. And fortunately, the EU is doing sort of a good job. They are thinking about these kind of things compared to other countries. But we have to. It can't be an afterthought again. We have to think now, what if we have a metaverse where we have avatars that are hyper realistic, that can be used for deepfake, that you control with your brains, and that you verify with your heart rhythm? What happens then? we have to think about it today, because it's only 15 years from now or so, or 20 years, when we will live in a world that has that. People always tend to forget that. As Bill Gates said, I think we overestimate the short term and we underestimate the long term. That's exactly the case.
Yeah, and I can see just a few questions here as well, Mark. And we're talking about, the metaverse maybe 3-5 years out there before sort of we realize some of the elements. But the question is, what are the near-term opportunities in the metaverse for organizations? So near-term, as in now,
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think from a near-term perspective, being able to collaborate with each other in a 3D environment, even if you are there without legs and with low polygon faces, even that is already much more intuitive than having a Zoom call. You have a lot of benefits when you do that. A couple of months ago, I was a part as an observer of a global security training with the top, I think, with 10 police force organizations from around the world. I think Singapore, UAE, Bahrain, Israel, Senegal, France, Spain, several others. And they were doing an exercise to understand how to deal with terrorism. And they had to solve, an upcoming terrorist attack in a fictitious country, and they did all this in virtual reality. They had also physical evidence, so they had to send physical evidence to the people. So they had really the convergence of physical and digital, and they managed to solve that case, and it was a great exercise in a virtual world. And one of the feedbacks that came out of it is that, because of the avatars where you didn't have hierarchy, it was much easier to connect with each other. I interviewed an Australian marketing agency who did for the book, who did had because of COVID, they couldn't have their annual events because they are a distributed company around the world. So they moved into the virtual reality, and people had different avatars, and that actually gave a fun angle to the discussion, and made people a lot more easygoing in the discussion, and actually they managed to get a lot more done. So yes, even if the visuals are not optimal at the moment, already it offers you a lot of benefits. So there are plenty of different tools that you can use from a virtual reality perspective to make this happen already.
And of course, if you're in certain areas, entertainment, etc., there's obviously, events already been run, whether it's in Fortnite, etc., that have incredible audiences. Mark, another question, you referred to Google and Facebook of the metaverse don't yet exist. Who is likely to be the equivalents of the Googles or Facebooks when it comes to the metaverse?
Good question. I think a couple of companies come to mind. Is one would be the companies who are building the pipeworks for the metaverse. Epic, Unity. They are building the pipeworks. They are building the tools to make this happen. And there are other startups who use generative AI to spin up 3D worlds with just a string of text, or to spin up 3D assets. NVIDIA offers that. I think NVIDIA is a company that's definitely on the list. I think these kind of companies that build the tools to make the metaverse happen, just like the gold rush, the people who stole the picks and shovels, they became rich, and not so much the people who dug for gold. Exceptions there. And I think it's the same thing happening now as well. Those companies who build the technologies to create these experiences, they are the ones who will be the big next big tech.
So those that are selling the shovels are the ones that will prosper. Mark, and just a question from myself, then I'll hand back to Tony. What is going to happen to the likes of the Googles, the Facebooks, Microsoft with Minecraft, etc.?
Oh, that's a very good question. No financial advice here. I think it very much depends on how they adapt. I think there's a reason why Mr. Zuckerberg is investing so much money in the metaverse, because he sees it's next generation internet, and Facebook is not that popular anymore, so he needs to change. I don't think that Facebook will in the long run will be a major player in the very long run. Google, I think, is different because they are so powerful and they're really investing in new technologies, and they are everywhere. They know everything about us. Well, Facebook does as well, but I was able to kick off and to delete my Facebook, but I wasn't able to delete my Gmail, for example. So, although I do have WhatsApp, so from that perspective, I'm I'm also screwed. But I don't know. It's Microsoft has a very distinct, different approach. They're really focusing on the enterprise. I find it difficult to say anything
No,
about
it
that.
is. It is. It's a very difficult question. And Mark, like, do we need a search engine for the metaverse? Obviously, if we've lots of assets that will end up maybe in different worlds within the metaverse, how do we know where to go? We have maybe that Genesis area where we go into, but how do we know where to find what? Is there going to be the equivalent of a search engine for the metaverse?
Well, we should. Because otherwise it will be very difficult to move around. Even when I find you where you are on the internet, I don't want to go into different worlds. Of course, I can ping you and say, where are you? But ideally, I would just want to ask my computer or whatever, where are you? And boom, I'm there. Or where did I leave my Lamborghini, my pink Lamborghini? Or I don't know, find it for me. Or I'm looking for asset XYZ. Where is it? Where can I find XYZ that I really like for? Find it, those kind of things. And there is no Google for the metaverse. Great business opportunity, I think. Also very difficult to achieve. But I think we do need that because you want to be able to find the assets in this virtual world. You want to be able to find and to be able to move around. I think it will be voice driven because text driven input doesn't really work. But that in itself raises a lot of different questions, because if voice search replaces text search and the AI determines what is the number one answer, and I can't look to page 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 myself, then those who control the voice AI search engine control our lives. So these are really important things to think about. There are caveats everywhere,
So Mark, I want to delve into this $1 trillion opportunity, because I'm sure there's plenty of interest in the $1 trillion. And look, you described very well a number of industries. Obviously, you talk about fashion, and you're very strong in terms of how fashion can benefit. Talk about, I learned a new phrase, massive interactive live events. So I could be in the front row of a 33 million people concert, enjoying it as if I'm sitting there. But you also talk about the potential for education and all those type of things as well. But I think what's particularly interesting is you talk about community, and you talk about creators, and you talk about rethinking this whole approach, that this isn't about, well, now we Web3, let's bombard that with advertising. This is about a totally different way of thinking about and connecting with customers. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think if we copy the practices of Web2, of like retargeting marketing and display ads that follow you around the web, if we copy that to a 3D world, we are pretty much screwed. So I don't think we should want that. You can see it already happening, especially with Generation Z and Alpha. They are very much community driven. They have a different approach. They have friends from all around the world that they meet through digital platforms. And community is everything. You see it in the different DAOs that are being set up by the community is really important. And I think that is really crucial. If you as a brand want to interact with a particular community, you have to live by the rules of that particular community, and you have to not enforce your advertising on them, and you look into that you can't avoid it, and wherever you look, the advertising will follow you. So blocking the view of the game you're in, I think you'll lose out pretty quickly, and you'll lose out your customers pretty quickly. Yeah, you need to. It's a thin world. It's a thin line, that you need to thread how to connect with your consumers in ways that are beneficial to of course the company, but also to your customers. And I think in the metaverse, that will become a lot more important than it has ever been in the past 50 years, where you can bombard people with messages, they couldn't really avoid it, and you would just be followed around the internet with the same stupid advertising of your shoes that you looked at for 5 seconds. I think that is really important. I think the benefit of this is that we will have really cool things happening. There's a lot of cool opportunities that could happen, where those brands that do really well will create a really strong community, a very loyal community, and we'll have also a lot more fun in the process, because interacting with brands doesn't have to be annoying. Interacting with brands can be fun, as long as they use our data correctly and they do all the right things from that perspective, from an ethics and social responsibility perspective. We can have a lot of fun with brands, and some brands are doing really well here.
Yeah, I mean, you reference advertising as about creating happiness, and storytelling as part of that, and you can see how immersive experiences can actually help create those sort of environments. Now, there is an interesting question that's just come in there, Paddy. Do you want to deal with that one?
Yeah, look, and I think Mark handles it very nicely in the book as well, but I think it's still worth asking the question from Nico, the impact of the metaverse on mental health. I suppose, do you think the metaverse will be able to adapt its technology from the lessons that we should have learned from social media?
Very good question. Thank you very much, Nico. Look, I think the metaverse can be very positive and very negative for mental health. Let's start with the negative part first. People have died behind their computer playing games for 24 hours in a row. So people will die in the metaverse. I hope not through a headset developed by the Oculus founder, which kills you if you lose in the game, which is whether it's an artwork, I'm not sure, but just the fact that you develop it is already crazy. Anyway, that's a side note. But it's people will get addicted to the metaverse. If you have a virtual world that's better for you than the physical world, people will stay in the virtual world because they don't want to be in the physical world. And very unfortunate, but that will happen. People will die in the metaverse because of that. And I think that's very important. People will get addicted to the metaverse. And I think we should be aware of that, and we should also, part of education, inform people that's not good to spend 16 hours in the metaverse or with the headset on. So now for the positive part, I think the metaverse can also help from a mental health perspective. I think that is very important. You see this already happening. You have the app Trip for virtual reality, which I think was mentioned one of the best events of this year by I think Time, and that can really help. And I'm an advisor to a company that builds virtual worlds, virtual reality for children, but not for children to talk and to do other things or bully each other, but for them to be. And interact with other kids, not through talking, but just through being, and so that they can have their own space, whether they might not have it at home, but they might have it in the virtual world, as their own safe space where they can just be. And I think that is really important. So it's from that perspective, it's the metaverse can be very positive for mental health. Now, there are plenty of examples of how you can use virtual reality to overcome fears. And so that's another aspect, but also from a psychological perspective, from a mental health, there's definitely positives to it.
Mark, one of the things you talk about is you talk about the metaverse savvy as opposed to digital savvy, right? And I've given up on trying to get guys off games in my house for 15 years, but you talk about Roblox and companies like that. And I think I saw a stat that something like 70% of 13-year-olds in the US use Roblox every day. But one of the things you say is that as they come into the workforce, the skills they have developed around collaboration, problem solving, creativity are all huge benefits to the organizations of the future. Now, they will have demands also in terms of how they work and where they work and that sort of stuff. But how does the existing, I suppose, leadership of organizations get their arms around this? Because this is alien.
True. And I think there will be some organizations that get it right, and some organizations that won't get it right. I think if the pandemic has taught us one thing, is that remote work is here to stay, and there are some companies who said no, you have to get into the office, I don't think that is the right approach. I think we should embrace these technologies, and that these technologies, for some that they work better than for others. So for you need to have really a hybrid approach there. But I think you have to embrace them. You can't ignore the next generation, and you might not agree with how the next generation works, but you just have to suck it up, because that's how it is. You can't just change an entire generation. These people have born with an iPad in their hands, and they just look at the world from a completely different perspective. You and I, we've seen the transition from an analog world to a digital world. These people are, they are born into the metaverse. They're born into this digital world, and that's a completely different approach. You have to embrace that. They have different. The fact that they have friends from all around the world, I think, is fantastic for them, and that offers great opportunities. So, some organizations will get it right and some won't. You have to embrace the next generation. You have to embrace change. If you don't embrace change, it's the end of the line.
Yeah. And I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here, guys. I think, unfortunately, because I think there's so many more questions we could ask Mark, and I think it's really important that we'd stay in touch, which I'm really intrigued by where you're going to go with the Digital Futures Institute, and hopefully that starts to make a global impact, and maybe there's an input for what we're doing here in Europe into that as well. Tony, I'll let you do the closing words.
Yeah, well, look, it's been a real pleasure to meet you in person, virtual person, Mark, as I've been following you for years. And anyone who doesn't follow Mark should follow him. His content and material is fantastic. So I want to thank Mark. I want to thank our audience. As always, great questions coming through. Thank the steering committee of the Digital Transformation Lab, and also to thank Cork University Business School for its ongoing and support for everything we do. So thank you very much, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
And I suppose for anyone that is listening, buy the book. Actually, there's I think 4 books now. And also, Mark is very active on LinkedIn, and I know on YouTube you'll find a lot of Mark's content there, and I'm sure on Twitter as well, Mark.
100%.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark.
Super.
Thank you very much.